Okay, so I thanks for having me. And I was in Phoenix last month and had a number of meetings, both with elected officials and some media and community groups. And so I'm happy to sort of be back virtually and sort of share some information that hopefully will be helpful for Phoenix when they make a decision on to what to do with the DOJ consent decree. So I wanted to start out by sort of doing a background on myself. Um, I'm from Washington State, and I was a deputy prosecuting attorney in King County, Washington in the 1990s. And then I was also worked as a special assistant U.S. attorney. Then I moved to the city of Seattle, and I was a public safety policy advisor for several Seattle mayors. And then I went to the city attorney's office, and I was there in 2011 when the Department of Justice came in and did a pattern of practice of the Seattle Police Department. And so I represented the city and was involved in all of the investigation discussions and as well as the findings discussions as and the negotiation of the consent decree that the city is still under. After the city signed the consent decree, the mayor appointed me to be the compliance coordinator to oversee the reforms in the Seattle Police Department. I left the city in 2015 and formed a company called Police Strategies with some former colleagues from Seattle PD. And we work with over 100 law enforcement agencies around the country, helping agencies collect and analyze and report on their data, mostly use of force data. And the reason that I'm sort of here and sort of speaking out is because when I was representing the city in the DOJ investigation, I tried to find any information I could on pattern of practice investigations and DOJ consent decrees. And I called cities and I called consultants and monitors who'd worked on it. And I couldn't find, number one, I couldn't find, anybody, who was willing to talk to me. And the information that I could find was very limited. And so Seattle, like most other cities, generally goes into this blind, not knowing what the DOJ is doing, not knowing what their options are. And so I learned a lot by going through the consent decree process. And now that I am no longer with the city and I have my own business, I am basically free to speak out about what I know and what I think about DOJ consent decree. So I'm not here. I'm not talking to Phoenix for, I'm not wanting any money. I'm not looking for a contract. I'm simply doing this because I want to help cities avoid going through what we went through in Seattle and many other cities are going through, simply because I think mostly because of a lack of knowledge about what is going on. So with that, the one of the most important things that Phoenix can do during this process is ask lots of questions. And what you'll find is that DOJ doesn't want to answer any questions, and they don't want any kind of openness or transparency. They want to do everything behind the scenes, and they want the city to just comply with whatever their demands are. So one of the questions that would be good to ask DOJ is how did they select Phoenix? There are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the country. And some of them all of them have some level of problem. There's no perfect police department in the country. All of them have some level of problems. And you're never going to find, 100% perfection all the time. So the question is, well, why did DOJ pick Phoenix and not some other law enforcement agency? In the last 30 years, there have only been 75 consent decrees. So most agencies go without any kind of DOJ scrutiny. So in most cities, well, first of all, it's unclear how DOJ works. They don't have any policies or procedures about how they do their investigations, how they choose their cities. What we do know is that DOJ typically goes into cities that have a high profile incident. So they investigated Minneapolis because of George Floyd. They investigated Ferguson because of Michael Brown. They investigated Louisville because of Breonna Taylor. They're investigating Memphis because of Tyree Nichols. So usually it's a high-profile officer-involved shooting incident that catches DOJ's attention, and then they go in to do their investigation. In Phoenix, it's less clear because you haven't had sort of a single high-profile incident. And I know a few years ago there were a higher number of officer-involved shootings, but it's not clear to me exactly what precipitated DOJ going into Phoenix. I have some theories, and one of them is that what I found and what other researchers have found is that the entire pattern or practice investigation and consent decree process is politically motivated. So these are political decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C. about which cities will have an investigation and which cities will have a consent decree. So one of my theories about Phoenix is that it has to do with elections. And so Phoenix and Arizona is becoming more of a swing state. And so DOJ is coming in to sort of solidify their base. That's just a theory, but and also the other thing about the Phoenix investigation is that it's gone on for so long. I think you're one of the longest investigations, and a lot of the information that DOJ will probably be providing as a basis of their findings is old and irrelevant, and so you have a different chief, different command staff, different policies, different training from what DOJ will be looking at a few years ago. But we don't know. But that's a good question to ask DOJ. Is it, why are you here? Why did you choose us over all these thousands of other police departments to investigate? So another question is, well, what is a pattern or practice? Because this is what DOJ does. They say, well, you have a pattern or practice of unconstitutional policing. So what is it? Well, we don't know. We don't know what a pattern or practice is because a pattern or practice is not defined. And even DOJ will tell you that they don't have a definition for what a pattern or practice is. So essentially, a pattern or practice is whatever DOJ says it is. So if they say you have a pattern or practice, because there's no definition and they won't provide you with any evidence, there's no way to sort of refute what they're saying. They're just simply allegations, basis allegations that they will be making in their findings letter. And these findings letters are not supported by any facts or data. They're simply usually anecdotal stories. Sometimes DOJ will simply fabricate. They did in Seattle. They fabricated cases and fact patterns to justify their findings. DOJ does not reveal their experts. They do not reveal any individual cases that they believe are unconstitutional. And so when cities request this information, DOJ refuses to provide it. So essentially what DOJ is doing with their findings letter is it's a bluff. They have no cards, and they're not going to show their cards because they have nothing. And so the question is whether a city is willing to call their bluff and make them prove it. And there's only one jurisdiction that's ever said no to DOJ, and that was the Alamance County, North Carolina, the sheriff. DOJ demanded that he sign a consent decree saying that he had a pattern or practice of biased policing, and the sheriff refused. DOJ sued, took them to court, and DOJ lost. The case was thrown out by the judge. And there's a 250-page opinion that basically says DOJ had absolutely no evidence that a pattern or practice existed. And so, but no city has ever said no to DOJ. Every city rolls over, surrenders, signs the agreement without any question. And so it's really important for Phoenix, when DOJ issues their findings letter, to start asking questions and get DOJ to back up their allegations with facts and evidence. And I guarantee you they will not provide it. So what is a consent decree? And this is something that even like cities and legal departments, they don't really understand what's going on. So a consent decree is simply a contract. It is a voluntary agreement between a city and the Department of Justice that's filed in federal court. The DOJ cannot force the city to sign a consent decree. It is a voluntary agreement. And so this is what a lot of people don't understand, and even cities don't understand. They think, oh, well, the DOJ will penalize us if we don't sign it, and it'll be worse if we go to court. And that's just not true. They have absolutely no leverage, or there's no way that they can penalize the city for not signing a consent decree. If the city refuses to sign a consent decree, then the DOJ has to file a lawsuit, and they have the burden of proving that there's a pattern or practice by a preponderance of the evidence. And they've only done that once in Alamance County, and they lost. So DOJ does not want to go to court because they're bluffing and they have no evidence. So that's why at this stage, Phoenix is holding all the cards, right? This is the only chance that the city has to defend itself. If the city signs a consent decree, it's all over, because you're handing over the control of your department and the city budget to a federal monitor and a federal judge, and they will determine policing and public safety in the city of Phoenix for the next decade or more. The other thing, briefly, about the lawsuit is if Phoenix were to say, no, we're not going to sign a consent decree, and even if DOJ sued and won their lawsuit, the worst thing that could happen to Phoenix is a consent decree. There are no other penalties. So why would the city agree that they have a pattern or practice of unconstitutional policing and sign a consent decree without making DOJ prove its case? It would essentially be like being charged with a crime and pleading guilty without ever seeing the evidence. And so it's so critical for the city to ask questions of DOJ, and then once they see that the DOJ is not going to give them any answers, then why would you ever agree to a consent decree? So how long do consent decrees last? Well, currently, when consent decrees started in the late 90s, they would last about 5 to 6 years. Now, consent decrees are all lasting more than 10 years. The Virgin Islands is the longest, 17 years and still ongoing. Seattle's over 12 years. I mean, it's just a decade. You have to figure a minimum of a decade. And one of the reasons that consent decrees last so long is because under every consent decree, you have to hire an independent monitor that's paid for by the city. And a minimum salary for the monitor is $1 million a year. For a city the size of Phoenix, it's probably going to be $2 million a year. The monitor only gets paid while the consent decree is in place, and the monitor determines compliance. So monitors do not want to find compliance because then they will lose their lucrative contracts. So the monitor will always find something wrong, no matter what, so that they can extend their contract another year and get another million or two. So that's the main reason. And even DOJ, the Attorney General wrote a memo saying the problems with consent decrees and monitors, and with a number of recommendations, but they haven't implemented a single one. This is a racket. This is very close to organized crime, because you have DOJ threatening to sue cities if you don't sign a consent decree, forcing cities to pay for monitors. Monitors have a financial interest in the consent decree and keeping it going as long as possible. It is a racket. How much does a consent decree cost? Well, in Seattle, we estimated, before we signed the consent decree, we estimated that it would last 5 years and cost $60 million. And DOJ went crazy because we released that to the press and we said, this is how much we think it's going to cost and how long it's going to last. DOJ went crazy. They said, you can't, it's not going to cost that much. It's not going to take that long. The Seattle consent decree has lasted 12 years and has cost more than $200 million, including over $20 million for the monitor. So it is going to cost in Maricopa County, a quarter $2 billion Maricopa County has spent on their consent decree. So you have a perfect example of the impacts of consent decrees in your own county. But this is like, again, something that cities don't consider before they sign their police department away. Um, the monitor and the federal judge will have absolute control over the city's budget. They will dictate how your budget is spent, how your local tax dollars are spent, and it's all going to be spent on monitors, consultants, and programs for the police department. And most of the work, most of these projects and funding is just pure waste, because it does nothing to improve policing, but it drains city funds from other critical city services, human services, transportation, everything else that the city does. All that money is paid for. The federal government brings $0 to this project, and they force the city to pay for everything. So what are the benefits of a consent decree? Well, the police department basically has a blank check. Whatever the police department wants, whatever the monitor wants, whatever the judge wants, they can get. And so there are some police chiefs that welcome a consent decree because they get to buy anything they want, and the judge will support it, and the city council has no choice but to fund whatever the police department wants. And so, what are the problems with consent decrees? Number one, I just mentioned local taxpayer. 100% of a consent decree is paid for by local taxpayers, and you have no control over your own city budget. You lose control of public safety services. The department is no longer managed by the police chief. The police chief is no longer accountable to the city council and the city manager. Everything is run by a federal judge and a for-profit monitor, and they will dictate what programs you have, what crime prevention programs you have. They will dictate everything in the department, and they don't care what the community thinks. They don't care about your crime problems. They're completely unaccountable. So what happens is, and this happens in every single city, what consent decrees do is they encourage depolicing and they discourage proactive policing, because officers are told, we want you to make fewer stops, fewer arrests, have fewer uses of force, and fewer complaints. And the way to do that is to stop being proactive. You know, if you see a suspicious circumstance, don't investigate, because that might result in a stop and an arrest that DOJ doesn't want. And so in every city, we see a disengagement of police officers and we see an increase in crime. There's a Harvard professor, Roland Fryer, who did a study in 2020 and found that DOJ investigations, pattern of practice investigations, resulted in an additional 900 homicides in 5 cities. And he based his conclusion on the fact that the arrests went way down because officers were disengaging during the investigation, and that allowed crime and homicides to increase. So crime will go up in your city if you do a consent decree. And so stops and arrests will decline while crime and public disorder will increase. And I just mentioned that Harvard study. Another thing that happens in every jurisdiction is that your most experienced officers who will transfer to other agencies or they will retire early. I've never met a police officer that wants to work under a federal consent decree, because they're no longer working for the community. They're no longer working for the police chief. They're working for a federal judge, and they have no choice. And they will be, nobody will have their back. So the judge is always looking for problems. The monitor is always looking for problems. And we see in the New Orleans consent decree, the federal judge and the monitor are actually getting involved in individual disciplinary matters, and they are trying to get officers prosecuted when there's no evidence of a crime being committed. Phoenix, like many other agencies, is already facing severe staffing shortages that will only get worse under a consent decree. No matter how much you pay officers, money's not the issue. Officers do not want to work in the kind of environment that is set up by a consent decree. This results in lowering hiring standards. And so, because there's no way that a consent decree city can attract qualified candidates, so we end up lowering hiring standards, and that ends up in more problems with police officers. And this is what we saw in Memphis. Memphis was having real problems recruiting, so they removed the requirement that you not have any felony convictions. So now Memphis is hiring officers who have felony convictions. And two of the officers that were involved in the beating death of Tyree Nichols had felony convictions themselves. Another problem is that the consent decree monitor, continually moves the goalposts. And again, this is to extend their lucrative contracts. So you may think that the consent decree is what is on paper, and that is just not true. The consent decree is whatever the monitor and the judge say it is. So you will see these consent decrees just mushroom into all these other issues in order for them to be able to extend their lucrative contracts. There's no accountability, absolutely zero accountability. So the monitor can be the worst monitor in the world, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't fire them. And this is what's happening in Maricopa County. And Sheriff Penzone recently spoke out against the consent decree that he's been forced to work under, and particularly the monitor who lives in North Carolina and hasn't been to Maricopa County in 3 years. He monitors remotely. So he's getting paid millions of dollars, and they're paying for office space in downtown Phoenix, and he's totally unaccountable. Federal judges, they're appointed for life, totally unaccountable to the people of Phoenix. DOJ, their attorneys are in Washington, D.C. So essentially, you have no control over public safety in your police department if you go under a consent decree. Are there alternatives to consent decrees? There are many alternatives. So it used to be that the Department of Justice had their community-oriented policing services. They used to have a collaborative reform program where they would hire a consultant to come in and evaluate a police department. They would come up with a series of recommendations, and then the COPS office would provide funding and technical assistance to implement those recommendations. And that was a fantastic program. And cities like Spokane, Washington, and Las Vegas, they went through this collaborative reform model, and it worked extremely well. They don't do that anymore. DOJ has canceled that program, and they're putting all their effort into adversarial reform process through the Civil Rights Division and consent decrees. And every one is a disaster. There is not one single successful consent decree in the last 30 years. Another option would be for the city to say, when DOJ issues their findings, the city could say, thank you very much for all your work investigating. We agree with some of your recommendations, and we're going to implement them ourselves. And the city could create their own community consent decree. They could have an agreement with their own community to say, we're going to implement these reforms. We're going to monitor them ourselves. We're not going to pay for an outside independent monitor. We're not going to have any judge. We're not going to have any DOJ attorneys involved. We're going to do this ourselves, and we're going to do it locally, and we're going to constantly improve our department and public safety. And the department's already doing this, right? They've been doing this for the last 2 years since the DOJ investigation started. They've been improving their policies, improving their training, improving their programs. All of that will be thrown out the window under a consent decree, because DOJ will want everything to start from scratch with their brand on it. Another issue about consent decrees is that it's all secret, right? DOJ will not, all the negotiations, all the policy development, everything is going to be conducted in secret. The community won't know what's going on. And so if you do it yourself, right, you can emphasize the openness and transparency aspect of the reform process. And you can have, make data available, have interactive dashboards, have regular community meetings. DOJ does not want to talk to the community unless you have something bad to say about the police department. So you can create a much more effective, robust, and responsive reform program than anything a consent decree could ever do. And the oversight and accountability would be to the elected officials, your city council and your city management, and to the community, instead of to a federal judge, a for-profit monitor, and DC attorneys. So you want to have oversight and accountability, but you want to keep it local. So if Phoenix refuses to sign a consent decree, DOJ will likely file a lawsuit because they're not going to let you go. And again, DOJ has the burden of proving by preponderance of the evidence that Phoenix has a pattern or practice of unconstitutional policing. And I guarantee you they cannot do that. They do not have the evidence. If they had the evidence, they would show you, right? They would be an open book and they would say, look at all the problems we found. All they're going to give you are allegations. They're not going to give you any evidence. And some people think, oh, well, we can't fight the DOJ because it would cost too much to litigate and so forth. So the cost of litigating this would be less than the cost of 1 year of a monitor. It's going to be less than $1 million because the city doesn't have to prove anything. It's the DOJ that has the burden of proof. You could hire experts and you could put on a case, a defense, but you don't have to. And the burden is all on the DOJ. They couldn't defeat Alamance County, a county of about 30,000 people. They're not going to be able to defeat Phoenix and show and improve a pattern of practice. Because the other thing is that Phoenix is one of the best police departments in the country. I've looked at their policies, their training programs. I've looked at their data to a certain extent, and there is no pattern of practice. And so DOJ will not be able to prove their case in court. So why would you agree to a consent decree up front? There's no reason to. And again, even if DOJ were to win the lawsuit, the worst possible thing that could happen is a court-imposed consent decree, and that's what's going on now in Maricopa County. That was not an agreement, right? The DOJ and ACLU sued Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and they won in court. That was a totally different issue. And then the worst thing that happened was a consent decree. It's the same thing. It's just, why would you agree to it up front? Make the DOJ prove their case in court. Okay, that's my presentation. I'm really happy to answer any questions you may have.
Hey, I'm going to moderate the questions. My first one is, usually when I have an event here of this type, I've had a half dozen, I bring in lots of the police to come to it. But they told me they were not permitted to come. They were told by their superiors, whoever that is, that they were not allowed to come to this. Why is that, Bob?
Well, I can tell you what I've heard. So what DOJ will do, and they've spent a lot of time, right, investigating Phoenix. So they've had a lot of time to do this. What DOJ will do is they will try to find allies in the city that will help them convince the city to sign a consent decree. So the city hired an attorney who used to work for DOJ, who used to be a monitor, to help them through the consent decree process. And generally, these kind of individuals are there to help prepare the city for a consent decree. They're not there to fight the DOJ. And so what my understanding is that there are officials within the city that support DOJ coming in and the city signing a consent decree. And DOJ does not want this kind of meeting to occur. They do not want any dissent. They do not want any criticism. If I had said this while I was working for the city of Seattle, I would have been fired. I think what is happening, and the reason that there are no officers here, is because DOJ has instructed the city not to allow this to happen.
Really? It's ridiculous. All right, so that explains that. I think I'm gonna moderate the questions so we don't have too many people talking at once. Who has a question? Come on, man. Okay, back here in the back.
How would we as a group or private citizens encourage the city administration not to enter into the agreement?
Yeah, so I can't stress enough how unique Phoenix is in this area. There is no city that I'm aware of that has ever questioned or expressed concern or resisted a DOJ consent decree. So the fact that these kind of meetings are occurring, and the fact that you have some organizations like Operation Blue Ribbon and the police union that are actively trying to inform and educate the public and elected officials about this process is so unique. And the other thing that I think DOJ has miscalculated with Phoenix is that in every other city, they have dealt with a strong mayor form of government. So DOJ targets the mayor for political pressure, and it's the mayor that signs the consent decree. And if you look at Minneapolis and Louisville, what DOJ did was they went to the mayor and they said, we're going to issue our findings and we want you to sign an agreement to agree to a consent decree. They call it agreement in principle. And in both cities, the mayor signed it. And then the mayors and the police chief get up at the press conference with the attorney general and they say how terrible their police department is and how it's all going to be fixed with a consent decree. So DOJ is used to being able to control mayors. They've never done a consent decree in a council manager form of government. So with Phoenix, they can't just target the mayor. They have to get or the city manager, because the city council is going to have to approve the consent decree. That means that they have to get a majority of city council members to vote yes for a consent decree. I don't know how they're going to do that. And the advantage that gives the community is that you are all represented by members of the city council, and they are going to make the decision. And hopefully they will listen to you and your views on what you would like them to do. And so that is the power that you have right now, is through your elected officials. And so it's very important for you to let them know how you feel. And that's a situation, because normally it's all done in secret and behind the scenes, and it's done by the mayor and nobody knows what's going on. So the fact that we're having this kind of meeting and that you've got groups and individuals who are already trying to educate and inform about the process means that you can intelligently lobby your elected officials for what you want your city to look like. And so that's really I mean it doesn't seem like it, but right now Phoenix is in the driver's seat because you have the option of saying yes or no. Once you sign the consent decree, it's all over and you're done for the next decade or more. So right now, the city has the option of making a decision on this issue. And so you really need to if you feel strongly about it, or let your elected officials know what you would like them to do.
Okay, we have another question, you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Bob. I'm just wondering the correlation between the decrees and defunding of police departments and reduction.
Yeah, so what's interesting is that the sort of Black Lives Matter, defund the police movement, they're all in favor of consent decrees.
Yeah.
But consent decrees are about refunding and overfunding the police, because you can't do all the reforms and buy all the IT systems and buy all the equipment that DOJ and the monitor and the judge want without spending a lot more money. And so again, this isn't about constitutional policing. It's not about public safety. it's about doing what the DOJ wants to do so that they can claim victory. And there's nothing about like, and like, for example, like all the training. So DOJ will make the police department do much more training than they're doing now. And all that training is extremely expensive because you either have to pay officers overtime for coming in on their days off to do the training, or you have to take them out of patrol to do the training so that they're not available for 911 calls. So all the training is a huge cost for consent decrees. And again, no demonstrated benefit of that. And then IT systems, DOJ will want all sorts of fancy IT systems and data collection systems and so forth. And, you know, that's all great, but it's going to cost tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. In Seattle, the monitor wanted a data analytics platform, and they hired Accenture to do it, and it was supposed to be $5 million, and it cost $25 million, and it still doesn't work well. And so there's so much waste. But all the DOJ and the monitor, the judge care about is, are you doing what we tell you to do? And so it is sort of not what many people expect who support consent decrees, because you end up diverting all your city funds to the police department.
Okay, Anna Sanchez.
Hi, my question is it possible to modify that agreement to indicate that the local community or the local police is not, or city of Phoenix is not going to pay for any of the costs incurred by the DOJ, and also limit the term to maybe a year, provided that they submit a reason for requiring the consent? Have you ever seen any consents being modified?
That's a great question, because this is an agreement. This is a contract, right? It's supposed to be a negotiation. You can propose anything you want. The city can propose anything they want in that contract. And so the city could propose, well, we'll do the consent decree if the federal government pays for it. You can absolutely do that. DOJ would refuse, right? They would say, no, you have to pay for it. And that's what I mean about this is a voluntary agreement. Why would you agree to pay for your own monitor, right? If DOJ wants the monitor so badly, make them pay for it. But it's never happened, because DOJ would never agree to it. So these cities think that they have no power, and when in fact they have all the power, because DOJ has no authority to force them to do anything. So absolutely, if you're going to negotiate a consent decree, then demand that everything you want be in the consent decree, including payment by the DOJ.
Okay, Chris.
Yes, I have two questions. One is, should the city, for example, sign this decree at any time? Is it strictly up to the DOJ when it can be rescinded or changed, or can the city ask to have it rescinded, or how does that process work?
Yeah, that question.
Yeah. So
Anna.
yeah.
I'm just asking, but can we just opt out at any point, or are we just locked in once it's signed?
Yeah, your life is over once you sign the consent decree. There is no way out, and this is what cities like New Orleans and Cleveland are at war now with their monitors and judges, because they want out of the consent decree, and they say we're in full compliance, and we've been in full compliance for years, and we should be able to get out. And it's 100% up to the federal judge, and the judge is going to listen to the monitor and no one else. And so they're never going to let you out. And what's happening in cities like Albuquerque and Seattle that have been under consent decree for more than 10 years, what DOJ is doing, and the judges are saying, well, we're going to let you out of 50% of the consent decree, but we're gonna do a consent decree light and keep you under consent decree indefinitely with a monitor on these other things that we don't think you're doing well in. And then their DOJ, of course, is claiming success. It's like, look, they did half of it. Isn't that great in 10 years? But there's absolutely no way out once you sign that consent decree, because it's an agreement, and the judge is the final arbiter over what that agreement means and says, and whether you get out of it. There's zero. You literally signing your life away.
Okay, Chris has another
My
question.
second question is, and you kind of touched on it there, when you said the federal judges listen to the DOJ. So my question in part was, do these judges that approve these consent decrees, do they have any expertise in law enforcement or anything such as that before they issue this, or they just strictly go off what the DOJ represents to them?
Yeah, so DOJ attorneys that impose the consent decree and create all the conditions have zero experience in law enforcement. They are usually young civil rights attorneys. They know absolutely nothing about public safety or policing. The federal judges know absolutely nothing about public safety or policing. The monitors are mostly former DOJ attorneys or law firms that have close connections with the DOJ. Sometimes they will bring in retired chiefs and so forth to help them. But again, they're only interested in getting their paycheck. They're not interested in anything else. And so they can always find something wrong. One of the things that I discovered recently is that, I mean, this is very close to organized crime because you actually have collusion, ex parte collusion between judges, monitors, and DOJ attorneys that has been going on since 2016. And what happened was that a couple of universities in Texas decided that they worked with the judge and the monitor in New Orleans, and they said, let's have a conference every year, and let's talk about our consent decrees. And let's come up with a common plan for how we're going to deal with all these cities and all these police departments. And you have every federal judge pretty much that's monitoring or managing a consent decree, for-profit monitors, DOJ attorneys, all meeting once a year to talk about pending federal cases. That is illegal and unethical. And yet it's going on every year. And they were all secret, invitation-only conferences. And I've filed complaints against these judges and against the DOJ attorneys involved because it's clear these are ex parte conversations between DOJ attorneys and federal judges about pending matters in federal court. And the city attorneys are not anywhere to be seen. So this is going on behind the scenes. And so it's an organized effort to control local law enforcement. And there's so much money involved. I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. And the other motivating factor are careers. So we had one federal judge, the federal judge overseeing the consent decree in Puerto Rico. He retired from the bench, and then he applied to be the monitor in Springfield, Massachusetts. So you've got this. There's so much money involved in this. And it's all paid for by you. It's all paid for by local taxpayers. So it is a racket.
Okay, hold on, Anna. Would the Arizona Republic reporter like to ask a question for the record?
I mean, you did say that there was basically no downside to challenging it because at the end of the day, the worst that happens is you're in the consent decree. But if they do lose the court case, then they have not only the burden of the consent decree costs, but then they do have the costs of litigation. So I guess I just wonder your thoughts on that.
So it's a given that a consent decree will last more than 10 years and, like Maricopa County, cost at least $250 million. I think that litigation against the DOJ, it's not a very long or complicated lawsuit, and the DOJ has to prove their case. City doesn't have to do anything. So you can litigate this thing in less than a year, and DOJ is going to want to move very quickly. And so again, the costs of litigation are going to be less than the costs of 1 year of a federal monitor. So it's yes, there would be additional costs in defending, but those costs are going to be inconsequential compared to the total cost of a consent decree.
Okay, Anna Sanchez.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. You said that this all started when a bill was passed in Congress when Clinton was the president. Can you give me the name of that bill again?
Yeah, so it's a crime control bill that was passed in 1994. And there was a section added. So this was a general crime bill. It had a lot of things in it. But there was one section, 42 USC 14141. And that section authorized the Department of Justice to conduct a pattern or practice investigation if they have reasonable cause to believe that an agency, a local law enforcement agency, is engaged in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional policing. Now, pattern or practice was not defined. And so, and this all came about because of the Rodney King beating in 1992. And so what happened was that the officers were initially acquitted, then they were charged federally, and two of the officers were convicted. But there was a not very well publicized DOJ memo that went out after that case that basically said that the DOJ believed that these officers acted because of bad policies and bad training.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
Section 42 USC 14141.
Yeah, 42 USC 14141 is the statute. It's very short. It's the statute that authorizes DOJ to do pattern or practice investigation.
Okay, another question. Do you have, or would you please be able to, if you have knowledge of a few attorneys that would be interested in defending the city of Phoenix in lieu of the one that they have chosen? I would like a few options.
Yeah, so I don't think that the consultant that they hired is necessarily, he's not sort of legally representing them. I think he's just more of a consultant advisor, but it would be up to the, because you have a city attorney's office. So they would be the ones that would be representing the city, and they should follow the direction of the city council. But the city attorney's office would have the option of hiring outside counsel to assist them or represent the city if they chose. But I think that the ability to do that would rest with the city attorney, not necessarily the city council or the city manager. But I'm not that familiar with your sort of legal structures, but it would I don't think it would be something where the city council could say, we're going to hire our own attorney to represent us. I think it would have to be done through the city attorney's office.
Okay, who else has questions? Okay,
I'm just wondering what is the best way to approach our city council people? I've written and approached other people on other issues and not felt that my voice was heard.
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't know your local politics that much, or you know how sort of, you know, this kind of advocacy works in your city. But all I can say is that like individually, right? I mean, you know, an individual community member, you know, doesn't have any authority to make a decision on this matter, and that all the decision-making power is going to be on the city council. And so it doesn't really matter what the police chief thinks, what the city manager thinks, what the city attorney thinks. If you have a majority of the city council that says no, then the city cannot enter into a consent decree. And so it's focusing, you know, as best you can, your efforts on the city council members and trying to at least let them know how you feel. But obviously they can make whatever decision they want to make. And so I know that the you know, there's been some, you know, some things in the media, there's been some sort of attempt to you know, with billboards and signs and things to sort of raise awareness. There's some email campaigns that are going out there, but it's really about, you know, informing and educating and making sure that your elected officials ask questions, that they don't, you want them to go into this with their eyes open, and you don't want them to feel bullied by the DOJ and that they have no choice. And you want to let them know that you'll have their back, right? Because DOJ uses political pressure to convince mayors usually to sign the consent decrees. And they will try to rally support, DOJ will try to rally support for the consent decree in the community. And I'm sure there are some people in Phoenix that do support consent decrees, and DOJ will be working to lobby them to lobby their council members. And DOJ will be saying, look, your political career will be over if you don't agree to this. And so that's their only leverage right now is political pressure.
Can we get a petition going and have, like, I don't know, 500,000 citizens from Phoenix sign it and say, no, mayor, we don't want this?
Yeah, I think a petition was a great idea because again, it's like you want your elected officials to know how you feel. And not only like how you would feel like that if you want them to say no, but how you will feel if they say yes. and just your concern because it's there is no city that DOJ can point to and say, look how great it is after a consent decree. So you can look at any city under a consent decree and you will find massive problems. And so all you have to do is say, look, council members, go to these other cities and talk to them. And if you find one that is happy, let us know. But everyone's miserable. So why do you want to make us miserable as well?
All right, who has another question?
How many cities actually do have this consent decree?
Well, over the last 30 years, there have been about 75 consent decrees. I think there are about 30 pending right now. I don't know the exact number. This is the other thing is that DOJ doesn't want, they want to do their press conferences when they make their announcements, but they really don't want people to take a close look at what's going on. So DOJ does not compile data or statistics on any of their consent decrees. So it's hard to sort of know at any given time what's going on, but I think it's about 30 pending right now.
Okay, was there a question over here? Okay.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how you feel, what is the objective of the Department of Justice in giving a consent decree?
Well, I think there's several things. So politics is number one. And if you look at the how the DOJ has done investigations and consent decrees through different administrations, you have a few started under the Clinton administration, just a couple under the Bush administration. It started ramping up under the Obama administration. There were none under the Trump administration. And now things are in overdrive. The Biden administration has done almost as many in the first term as the Obama administration did in 2 terms. So everything is ramping up and things are accelerating very rapidly. And so it is political. I mean, it's a political process. This is not about constitutional policing. And so that's number one. Number two is money. There's so much money to be made by people, and it's a revolving door. So the judges will become consultants, DOJ attorneys will become consultants. If you're picked as a DOJ monitor, your career is set for life, right? They will make sure that you get as much business as you want, and so money's number two, and number three is careers. So anyone in the federal government who's involved in a consent decree is handsomely rewarded. So Tom Perez, who was head of the Civil Rights Division when Seattle went under a consent decree, after Seattle did the consent decree, Tom Perez was appointed to be labor secretary, and then he became head of the DNC. The young attorney that was working on the Seattle consent decree was nominated, who had no experience. He's a young attorney, and after the city signed the consent decree, President Obama nominated him to be a federal judge. So there are so many perks that both financial and career-wise that the attorneys get for being involved in a consent decree process, that that's their motivation. It is not constitutional. It's not civil rights or constitutional policing at all.
Okay, any other questions?
One other question.
Great.
Being as you were involved in the Seattle case, what programs, policies, procedures did the DOJ inflict upon the city of Seattle?
Well, what happens is that like the interesting thing about Seattle is before the DOJ did their pattern practice investigation, the federal government praised Seattle as a model police department, because Seattle, as you know, is a very liberal, progressive city. We had a very progressive police department. We had so many community policing programs, community councils, de-escalation training, crisis intervention teams. we did everything ahead of the curve in terms of police reform. And I myself went to DC on numerous conferences and would hearing praise from DOJ officials about how great Seattle PD was. Then suddenly, in 2011, the U.S. Attorney Jenny Durkan, who eventually became the mayor of Seattle, said, "Well, we're going to launch an investigation into pattern of practice." And then they issued their findings 6 months later, and suddenly Seattle was the worst police department in the country, and everything was wrong, and the officers were out of control, and violating people's rights on a daily basis. Even though we had very low complaint rates, very low lawsuit rates, and we had every program imaginable. And so what DOJ did was they said, okay, everything you're doing is wrong. So we have to start from scratch. So we scrapped all of our policies, we scrapped all of our training programs, and we had to literally write them from scratch with DOJ attorneys, with the monitor, with the federal judge. And so they transformed the entire department, basically dismantled it and then rebuilt it in their image. And now it's worse than it's ever been. I mean, officers, the staffing levels are at record lows, homicides are at record highs, and DOJ is somehow claiming victory. So they will completely transform the department, no matter how good your department is.
Okay, Bob, I have a question. When you, this is called the DOJ consent decree, which department? Is it the FBI that does the heavy lifting in this, or who?
Yeah, no, this is the other interesting thing is that we talk about the DOJ, and the DOJ is obviously huge.
Right.
And there are a lot of components to the DOJ, including, you know, the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, National Institute of Justice. I mean, it's huge. And a lot of the DOJ is really, really good, and they do great things. But what we're talking about is a small office, the Civil Rights Division, and we're talking about a small section within that office, the Special Litigation Section. So this is a handful of attorneys that in their star chamber, they decide which cities will be investigated and what the findings letters will say. So this is an extremely small, and I've heard from many DOJ officials that work in other divisions that are telling me, yeah, we totally agree that the Civil Rights Division is out of control. And so there's not uniform agreement within the DOJ about what the Civil Rights Division is doing. But the head of the Civil Rights Division, Kristen Clark, is an anti-police activist. I mean, that's what she did before she was appointed to that position. Her mission is to get as many departments under a consent decree and suppress as much policing as she can while she's there.
That's awful. Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, we don't want to, you know, take advantage of this generous time. Any more questions? And then we're going to have Plea come up and kind of wrap things up for us. Let's thank you very much. Yeah, let's give Bob a.
Okay.
Bob, you were just awesome, man. Thank you so much. And if you come to Phoenix, please come and see us personally.
Okay. Well, thank you, and good luck to everyone.
You're welcome to stay online. We're going to have Plea come up and kind of wrap things up for us. You're welcome to stay on if you want to hear what they have to say. Otherwise,
Sure. I'd love to hear what Plea has to say.
You want to come back? Just talk about anything.
Yeah. Well, I think that Bob answered most of the questions. If you guys have more, definitely let me know. But from police perspective, we're just really grateful to have the community support of our police department and our police. We're grateful to Bob for being such a staunch advocate for opposing the consent decree, because it would cost tens, hundreds of millions of dollars and over a decade of our lives. So police just really grateful again to have your support, and for Nick for organizing this and creating this forum to have these discussions. There's obviously a lot of not just misinformation, but I think that you mentioned a lack of knowledge, or Bob mentioned that. And that's largely because there's not a lot of information about the DOJ's investigation and the status of it, but it's important for us to all be as informed as we can be. I know Bob shared his contact information. I'm sure Nick could help get you in touch with Lee. I'm happy to share my contact information. But
You
again,
know, one of the things I think we, like, when we leave here, we need to, like, we've already, like Anna and other people, myself, have already written to the council people, Jim Waring is our guy, and to the mayor, we've already done that. But now with this new information and we're like better educated now, I think everyone here realizes how serious this is, right?
Yeah.
This is a big deal and we will lose our freedoms as a result. So we need, what are our next steps, like marching orders? If you were us, what should we do? Got to do something.
yeah, no, absolutely.
I have a couple of ideas after you're done.
Yeah, I think continuing to be vocal. You know, we've heard, you know, Jim Waring is very supportive of the police and is very much against the consent decree, but there are, you know, we don't know where everybody on the council stands. So, I mean, we're up here in North Phoenix and Jim Waring's probably the representative for everyone in this room. But, you know, I don't think it hurts, you know, to reach out to some of the other council members because it's the council that will ultimately make the decision. But also, you know, just making sure that your family understands what's at stake, making sure that your friends and neighbors understand what's at stake. You know, if you've already written to your council member, you know, encouraging other people to do so, because I think a volume of voices is really going to be compelling.
Okay, Anna, go ahead.
Okay, so I just want to say, I have written, but not to Jim Waring because I already know where he stands. I've written to all the other counselors, the mayor, the city manager, and the city manager's assistant. And we know they're not reading the emails. However, when you go to your sent box, if you take that email and send it every day, they will pay attention to the volume. They may not read the content, but if they're flooded by a trillion emails on a daily basis, they will have to pay, because that is public information. So you know, when you send an email to the city of Phoenix, that's official public business. So that's one thing. Another thing is I'm intending to contact our city people in Washington so they can review that bill, that section, and see if they can modify it and present it and get the DOJ out of our face and everybody's faces forever. They don't have any authority because they're not elected by we the people. They're put in by the administration. So therefore, they can't come in here and impose their will upon us. That is illegal.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, I don't know if I pick it up or if it's available, but what is the timeline here in Phoenix for consent decree vote?
So it would follow the DOJ's recommendations, that it would follow the conclusion of the investigation, which I think Bob spoke to a little bit, but we don't know.
Oh,
Yeah, that's one of the reasons the event is like today. This was the only day I had available to have this meeting. And I didn't do a very good job of getting enough people. This is a good crowd, but usually I pack this place full when you've never been here before. I asked Matthew Kenny, who is with Lee, I said, what's the end date on this? When do we, you know, what's the date so I can plan this? They said, that's the problem. They're not telling us. Could be tomorrow, could be next year. So I said, well, shit, I better get this thing rolling.
Yeah, and the third solution, I am going to see if we can start a petition. We will use you as leverage for your distribution channel. We have other networks,
Right,
but we need to get signatures in our petition.
okay.
is the I'm sorry,
No, that's.
is the DOJ budget currently being paid by the city of Phoenix, or is it that's paying for their?
Oh, who's funding the investigation?
We are paying for it. It's been $2 million so far in the last 2 years.
I don't
The
know, maybe Bob
office
knows
that is occupied by the mentor, the representative, what is it called, the monitor, is $200,000 a month, and it's vacant. Nobody sits there.
Oh, right, with the Maricopa County one.
Yeah, no, that's my understanding with the state. but maybe it's Maricopa County.
That's in Maricopa County.
Yeah,
That one. Okay.
yeah, we don't have a federal monitor yet.
Okay. So that is the
Hopefully
Maricopa
the
County.
agreement is signed.
Right. Um,
Yeah.
So
then
we
it's
haven't
the-
started incurring the costs for a federal monitor, but I don't actually know who's funding the investigation. I would guess the DOJ.
The Arizona Republic does have articles on how much it's costing so far. I've written.
How much is it?
I do not remember off the top of my head, and I don't want to misstate a number, but if you
Yeah.
do Google the Arizona Republic DOJ investigation, the city council gets information packets that collect information on how the city is preparing for the investigation and the cost that it has incurred so far.
Okay, we got this gentleman right here, one sec, ask a question. He's been very quiet all.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you recognize that this is nothing more than this consent decree garbage. It's nothing more than a glaring example of an illegitimate authoritarian government trying to insert itself in a way that destroys state rights in the state of Arizona. It's our responsibility as leaders, and we are the government, to make sure that the people who represent us mirror our thoughts on this situation. Okay. Here we have an example of this authoritarian government trying to convince us that we have an undefined problem and try to make us believe that the only way, the only solution to that is the government to step in. Government is not the solution. Government is the problem. And we've got to stop that by any means necessary.
Thank you for speaking up.
Yeah.
You've been holding it down all. Okay, back here,
I basically gonna echo his sentiments because I think people, particularly in Arizona and for the West, we don't like federal government interfering with our local affairs. And if whatever the problem is, we can solve it locally. We don't need them to do that. So I think people jump on that part of that.
Could I add something?
I was just curious if this topic has come at a city council meeting yet, and if not, what do we need to do to get a topic so that we can attend and voice our concerns and find out exactly where these council people stand, because as I heard from somebody, I think it was her, she's not getting much of a response.
They don't read.
So that scares me. That why aren't they saying yay or nay?
hey, looks like he popped back in.
Yeah, he's got a question.
Are you there, Bob?
Yeah, I actually wanted to sort of address some of the comments that were being made. So one advantage of saying no and litigating is that the city could raise constitutional issues and that nobody has ever raised before. And one of them is the 10th Amendment and states' rights. So I believe that the pattern of practice statute is unconstitutional. I do not believe that the DOJ actually has the authority under the US Constitution to come in and manage local police departments. And so if you say no, then the DOJ has to prove their case in court, but you could also raise other defenses. And one of them is the constitutionality of the federal statute. The other issue is just not knowing what is going on. Nobody knows what's going on with DOJ right now in Phoenix. Nobody knows why the investigation has taken more than 2 years. Nobody knows what DOJ's next move is going to be. And that's the way they like it. They keep everybody in the dark, and then they act suddenly. As soon as they get somebody to agree, then they'll have a national press conference. The other thing about funding is what I've read is that because it takes a lot of effort on the city's part to give DOJ everything they want. I mean, we were talking probably millions of records, ride-alongs, interviews, everything, body cam footage, et cetera, et cetera. So my understanding, and they've also hired this former DOJ consultant to help the city. And I think he's charged quite a lot of money as well. So my understanding is that the city spent about $2 million helping the DOJ with their investigation, but the DOJ obviously is using their own attorneys and their own experts. But this has already cost the city a lot of money.
Okay, one other thing is, I'm thinking what we can do next, now that we have this information. We have 25 people here today, counting myself as the host and Lee. If I have another event, and each of you bring one additional person, in Anna's case, she already brings like 5. But maybe we can have a follow-up event and keep the information going. My company will host another one of these. If you would come back, if a more informed person, and you would tell them, look, this is a really huge deal. And our future is at stake here. So if we'll have another event, write me, you have my email, write me if you think that you can bring 1 or 2 more people who want to fill this up and down the hallway. And okay, go ahead, Anna.
I like that idea, thank you. I'd like to propose also, if you don't mind, give me your information. He is a good representative. I would like to invite him to attend the different legislative district committee meetings that happen once a month. I think there is about 5 LDs in the city that cover the city of Phoenix. So I can connect with the chairman of the committees so that you can come and speak. And that way you can reach out all of the PCs that are representing the constituents in each legislative district.
This is a brilliant idea.
I mean, we do have these meetings for a reason. I don't know if people know what a legislative district is or what a precinct is, but all the political parties in Arizona have volunteer people that form committees and they represent their constituents. And, and so this is what we do. We inform people.
Well, this little group has to grow.
Oh, I am encouraging everybody to become a BC.
Nobody knows what's going on.
And to fight for your freedom. If you really care about your freedom and your protection, security, and whatever else, you need to be part of the movement.
Yeah.
Meaning the freedom movement, which is your lives, right? You need to step out and become a BC.
Yeah, otherwise the demise, we deserve this.
Yeah,
demise
which is
that's
all the
coming.
BC, I don't have time, I'm gonna walk my dog instead of reading an article. Yeah, that's all that is good, but hey, if you do nothing today, before you go to bed, draft an email and send it to every person in the city of Phoenix. Go to their City of Phoenix website, get their email addresses and send an email, please. And then every day, resend it, the same one. That doesn't take but 5 minutes.
Arizona
That's the list.
Republic, we want to read what are you writing an article in paper or is it? How do we know? We'd like to see this. A lot of us don't know, we don't get the paper.
Yeah, the Arizona Republic's website is azcentral.com. So
Will we have to pay, is there a paywall?
it depends on some stories are paywalled, some are not. I know right now our stories, when they first publish, they're free for 24 hours. So if you're checking and reading proactively, I think the website kind of.
What's the website address? ArizonaRepublic.com?
It's azcentral.com.
Oh, yeah, of course.
When do you anticipate this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We want to see what you wrote
This
about us.
I don't know for sure. My goal is to publish it next week. I'm
Any
working.
particular day? Sunday?
I don't know. It depends on if I can file it, by the end of the day.
What
or-
section?
It would be in the Phoenix section. Honestly, our website is not the most user friendly. So if
That's
you
for
just
sure.
type my name, Taylor Steely, you will get all of my articles. So since, if anything Phoenix related, that's how I would recommend finding it because our website's just not the most user friendly.
Yeah, we,
And how do you spell your last name?
SEELY.
so if we do this meeting again and we have 100 people, that would be awesome. And maybe we can squeeze that in. Do you think we should do it before the holidays or after?
Like before Thanksgiving or
No,
The
before,
December
like in between
holidays.
Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's always like a hard time.
it's a difficult time, but I mean, if you can get the people, I think
But-
Thanksgiving, maybe.
Yeah, after Thanksgiving, before.
After Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
Get toward the end. of
people
December.
aren't into the Christmas stuff just quite yet.
Yeah.
All right,
Beginning of
because we don't know,
We don't want to wait.
we don't want to wait, and we don't know, they could find out that, oh, there's a citizen movement going after she writes that article. And I said, oh, we better vote on this now.
Yeah. There is, I've been told that they do give, the agenda, the city of Phoenix, 6 or 7 days before the actual meeting. Which, by the way, everybody can phone in and express their opinion, and that you can show up as well, because these meetings are open to the public. And there is a schedule of when the meetings occur on their website. But anyway, whenever they decide to vote on this, it should be announced 6 or 7 days before.
Mhm.
We don't have very much time once that is announced, but we
right.
have to keep an eye on it.
So we'll probably shoot for something a little bit after the holiday, like Dennis said. And then after they screw over the police, they'll come after the block watch guy. What?
Well,
I'll be getting
what's gonna happen,
lawyers.
the property values will go down. I'm gonna sell my house and move to somewhere else. Because I'm not gonna live in a crime state. And basically we're gonna become another Los Angeles where people do
Portland.
whatever they want to.
Yeah,
You'll have
We'll be
a
living
sign
in
on the
tents.
light somewhere.
So unfortunately, life will not be ever the same as it's been. So I like your contact information.
Yes. Happy to-
all right, anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, we can kind of
Just
wrap up
on
that. Okay, one
Just
more.
have a thought here. I mean, Bob Scales did a great presentation. I didn't take the best of notes, but I'm wondering if somewhere you don't have the, his written presentation and his.
Well, he's gonna let me post this online, right, Bob?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I can also send you the PowerPoint if you want to.
You got my email address, Bob, just send it to me, we'll
That'd
make
be
sure they
great.
get it, but,
Okay.
I'm gonna edit this down, make it look more professional, and then I'll put it on, my website for you guys,
Well,
and then you can share this with other people,
Yeah.
right?
And I'm thinking specifically the bullet points that he had on the screen. I wish they would have taken a picture of it.
Yeah, God bless you, Bob Scales, you're awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I like I said, I mean, this is a passion for me as well. And if Phoenix can be the first city to say no to a consent decree, that will other cities will follow. You can bring the whole process to a screeching halt.
Okay, one more time, let's give both Plea and Bob Scales a big round of applause.